Screenwriting is kind of like that scene in The Matrix when Neo is in the sparring room and Morpheus says,
"What you must learn is that these rules are no different than the rules of a computer system. Some of them can be bent. Others can be broken. Understand?"
And at first, Neo doesn't understand. Later, he does. And many of you are baby Neos when it comes to screenwriting. So let me break this down for you. When it comes to story, the rules of screenwriting are no different than the rules of how any other story works. There are things you must have for a story to work and things that you don't necessarily need. But when it comes to storytelling, some things can be bent, others broken. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples in each camp to help you understand. There is a bit of craziness happening, and I want to make sure we're in the same sparring room with the same groundwork. There are no rules when it comes to screenwriting. Screenwriting is a combination of story and of storytelling, just like any other medium. But these two elements have been miscommunicated in so many ways and perpetuated by so many different people that it's hard when you're trying to figure out the craft of screenwriting. It's hard to sort through. But there are definitely screenwriting conventions, things that are expected by readers and people working within the industry that you have to do. And you have to demonstrate that you understand the conventions of screenwriting. And you can deviate, but it should be with purpose and intentionality when you do. And what I'm going to tell you doesn't mean you should break or bend the conventions. I'm letting you know that you can if you want. And it's not because I'm some gatekeeper. I've just been around long enough to know what will help you get favorable reads on your scripts and help you get into the room so you can actually have a career if you want one. So I'm going to give you the things that you should not mess with, and then some things that you can bend or even break. What you can't mess with, though, is story. Stories require very specific things to be a story, and they have to be put together in a very specific way so the story works and is functional. Now, maybe you've bought some furniture at IKEA or something. When you get the box, it has all the pieces in it for a desk, let's say. But it's not a desk. Not yet. And if you ignore the instructions, you might be able to put together something functional, but it may not be sturdy enough, or it may not look right. It might look funny. So you have to put it together in a very specific way so it can function as best as possible as the desk that you bought. Now, with this example in mind, the pieces of the desk, that's the story. The way you put it together, that's the storytelling. And it doesn't matter if you follow the directions or not. If you are missing a piece, you don't have a desk. But you can, if you want, take the pieces, fashion them together in some other configuration, and still have a desk. So the first thing you can't mess with is the pieces of story. You have to have them. And if you don't know what the pieces of story are, you need to learn. I have a lot of videos about story and the pieces of story, and I even have a digital book you can get that breaks down what story is. It's linked below if you're interested. But you cannot mess with the pieces of story. You have to have all of them. And at its simplest, a story is about someone who wants something badly, is having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. And if you don't have that, you don't have a screenplay. You don't have a story. I'm sorry, Skippy. You can write experimental stuff all you want, but if you don't have those components and a few others that kind of make those pieces work, you're not going to have a screenplay. So do not neglect story. Build a solid one first, and then figure out the best way to tell it or put it together. And this is where you can start bending and breaking conventions as they relate to the storytelling components of screenwriting. Essentially, everything that's storytelling is something you can manipulate to suit your purposes. So just to start, think about the instruction manuals for putting things together against the instruction manuals for IKEA putting things together stuff. Okay? There are a couple of very stark differences. One, the IKEA instructions, the pictures are larger. It's a little easier to see what it is you're supposed to do just by looking at the image. Two, IKEA instructions include no words, 0. Now, do other instruction manuals work? Well, sure they do. Would you argue that IKEA's work better? Well, it depends on you. Some of you probably hate IKEA furniture, and maybe one reason is the instructions don't make sense to you because you like the words to help describe what you're supposed to be doing. And I mention that because it's no different than screenwriting. Both sets of instructions allow you to end up with a desk, but the storytelling of how to get that desk is different. The pieces, the story, is exactly the same. The storytelling, the way you put it together, is different. And this is why it's important for you to differentiate between tools of story and tools of storytelling. If it's a story component, you gotta have it. You can't futz with it, you can't mess with it. You absolutely have to have it, and we absolutely have to see, for example, the status quo of your main character, 100%. But how long do we spend with them in their status quo? Okay, that's storytelling. So let me give you 3 tools of storytelling that you can easily manipulate. In other words, you can bend these. At times you can even break them. And then I'm going to tell you one very important thing you must keep in mind if you want to find success when you're bending and breaking some of these things. One is pacing. Now, pacing can be impacted in a couple of ways, but the one I want you to really understand that you can break are any of the page number expectations for where elements in your story take place. Yes, your script still needs to be under the acceptable page count because otherwise you look like you don't know what you're doing. But hitting your inciting incident on page 17 or whatever is stupid. For some stories, yeah, it might be on page 17. Others, it might be on page 3. Others, page 31. And yes, if your inciting incident is too late, and how late? Well, that's up to the reader. It's, kind of depends on the story. Okay, so if your inciting incident is too late, then more than likely your story is broken. It's not the storytelling. It's a story that's broken. But you can pace things as appropriate for your story. Maybe you need to do some world building. It better be interesting and entertaining if you're going to take the time to do it. You better be employing other storytelling tools to keep the audience engaged for a while, because if you delay elements about the story too long, the audience is going to lose interest. This is why there's always the note. Start the story as soon as you can. It's the story pieces you got to get up toward the front. But you can manipulate the pacing. And if you're reading anything or listening to anyone tell you that such and such has to happen on page whatever, it's not true. It's a convention, but not a rule. And you can bend this one. But definitely determine the pacing so as to tell your story in the best possible way. And one of the ways you tell your story in the best possible way is number 2 on this list, format. And this is one of those things that most aspiring writers think of that actually has all the rules. Nope, format doesn't. It's conventions. And if you understand why things are done in specific ways, it helps you know what can be bent and what can be broken and how to do it. For example, a screenplay is formatted like it is so as to represent, on average, 1 page of script equaling 1 minute of screen activity. Now, some pages work out to a little longer, some a little less, but on average, each page is about a minute. So let's say you have a fight scene that you write, and it takes up 1/4 of a page, so roughly 15 seconds. But there's a lot that has to happen, and as you kind of imagine it and play it out in your head, it's probably going to actually be closer to a minute. So you know what you can do? Well, you can format it a little differently to make it last the whole page and represent the approximate time that you think that fight is going to take. Now, maybe you have some lines of description that just have 1 word and you're just creating lots of white space or a short phrase or whatever. Maybe you're adding in some commentary about what's going on along the way. You can do lots of things. And fight scenes and sex scenes actually are pretty much the same thing, in case you're wondering. So let me give you one of my favorite examples of this, and this is from Shane Black's script for The Last Boy Scout. Corey and Jimmy are engaged in very hot sex. This is not a love scene. This is a sex scene. Sigh. I'm not even going to attempt to write this quote-unquote steamy scene here for several good reasons. Reason C is my favorite, although the other 2 are also accurate. But the space it's taking up on the page is roughly the pacing, which was number 1 that we talked about. But here, Shane Black is breaking several conventions when it comes to formatting with screenwriting, even while he's following other conventions of formatting. So you can bend and even break the format, but if you do it, make sure you're doing it for very specific reasons. And this example leads into the 3rd thing you can bend or break, because actually this one scene by Shane Black is doing all 3 of these things that I'm mentioning. And the 3rd convention that you can break is style. This scene completely breaks the 4th wall in the screenplay. He's talking directly to the reader about the reading experience and how they should be interpreting it. And if you ask anyone, this is a huge no-no, and yet it's done here. Why? Well, because it fits the storytelling mode that's been set up. The tone isn't changing, and this gets at the important part I need to mention to you. When you bend and break things, be judicious and be consistent. This isn't the only scene in The Last Boy Scout where Shane Black breaks the fourth wall. He's intentional about what he's doing, and some of the formatting things are consistent throughout the script. And it's not just because it's Shane Black, okay? He's doing things for very specific reasons, and he's being consistent throughout. The style is tailored to the type of story being told. That's what makes it acceptable. Not the fact that Shane Black wrote it, but because he's tailoring the style to the story. And the script, if you're not familiar, is very playful in its style. It's an R-rated action comedy, and it's written like an R-rated action comedy. The style suits the story, and the style has been bent and broken to match the story. In other words, when you bend or break conventions, it should add to your story. It should make it better for the reader. If it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, don't do it. But if it's going to gain you something, yes, add it to the story and bend or break. And you should never be doing anything that bending and breaking stuff just because. Okay, that's a horrible reason to do something different in a script there, Skippy, so don't be doing that. But if you're adding value to your script by how you're pacing it, how you're formatting it, or how your writing style is informing it, then feel free to bend or break the conventions that you need to. But keep in mind that you don't change everything. Even though you could, you shouldn't. And the reason is that you need to communicate to the reader that they are in good hands, that you know what you're doing, because you're writing a script to be read. Maybe it gets sold, maybe it's a calling card script, and it gets you a writing job. In either case, the people reading it have to know you know what you're doing. They have to know you can write a screenplay and tell a story in a compelling way. They have to know that you might manipulate some things, bend some, even break some, but the story is still there, and everything you are bending or breaking is enhancing, adding to the story. So there are no rules, just conventions. Story, you can't bend or break that. You've still got to have the bones of a story. But the storytelling, you can bend and break that. Just be intentional when you do. And the important thing, be judicious and be consistent with bending and breaking. Now, regardless of what you bend or break, there are some things you should be doing in the first few pages of your script, and you can learn about those by watching this. Thank you for watching. Fun buttons and links below, including my book on story if you need to know what those pieces are, and when you tell a story that matters. See you later.